A lot of kids who are in adverse or disrupted environments, one of the few ways they have to cope is to be very detail-oriented and achievement-oriented and goal-oriented. And when you find your way to the military, all of those qualities are highly sought after and rewarded, and it only builds from there, let's put it that way.
I know I had these symptoms because some days I would be able to wake up and fire through a to-do list, and other days I'd be able to wake up and I would just barely get anything done all morning, and I'll be like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I perform like the people to my left and right?
Welcome to The Story Behind the Symptoms, a podcast from Symptomatic.me. Your host is David Clark, MD, a board-certified gastroenterologist who successfully diagnosed and treated over 7,000 patients with neuroplastic pain or illness. Each episode, we dive into our guests' life experiences to uncover the deeper causes of their symptoms. By listening to their story, you will gain insights that advance your own journey towards knowledge that becomes healing.
Hello and welcome to the Story Behind the Symptoms podcast. I am your host, Dr. David Clark, president of the ATNS, and we are going to be talking today to Chris, who is going to tell us about his neuroplastic symptoms, and we're going to explore those and try to understand where they came from and how recovery was achieved. Chris and I actually met in a pub in London following the recent Stress Illness Recovery Practitioners Association conference and had a wonderful conversation about his app that he has developed. But we're going to start with the personal story. Chris, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, my name is Chris, and I have a 5-year story with ME/CFS, a background in the military before that. And then, as you mentioned, I'm now the founder of FreeMe, the app for ME/CFS and fatigue-related conditions. So nice to be here and looking forward to sharing my story.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, I like to begin with when and where the symptoms began and just explore from there what their course was over time with perhaps ups and downs along the way.
Yeah, sounds good. That would take us back probably at least 10 years now. And it's a time when I was in the military. I was a Royal Marines commando, and that is a busy time for me, and it's a very interesting time. But at first, my symptoms were pretty light, and they were manageable. I was still absolutely achieving things, getting on with life, and I could not have diagnosed myself, or no one could have diagnosed me with ME/CFS at that time. I guess the first thing I noticed was just I would train and then I almost pay a price for that training. So for several days afterwards, I would feel a lot more tired than I usually would. I just wouldn't be able to get stuff done. So if I had a to-do list, that to-do list, I would really struggle to kind of make progress. And my sleep would suffer as well. I would just wake up and not feel refreshed. And I would constantly be in this battle of trying to optimize everything and be more healthy. And
difficult to imagine a job that would be more challenging for somebody with chronic fatigue than Royal Marines Commando. I am just in awe that you could possibly function in that profession with chronic fatigue at the same time. But please go on.
I mean, at that time, I was functioning. I really was functioning. But I was noticing these symptoms, and I was noticing that I was different to the people around me. And so, I was still training, and I would just pay the price. I would just keep going at it. And really, I did my whole military career, or the latter half of my military career. I didn't stop. I would just notice that my capacity to train would decrease, and the further I went on, I was still pushing. I was this personality type. I think it goes further, actually. I think it takes me further back to the type of person I was. I started to notice that actually I was always trying to achieve something. I was always trying to pursue something. I wanted to be fitter, faster, stronger, and I wanted to achieve in my military career. And that career was the first time where I really felt a huge sense of purpose, of identity linked to it. It was the first thing in my life where I felt like I was really good at it, to be honest with you. And so it really mattered to me to be good and to achieve things in my career. And I just, as my symptoms started coming on, I doubled down on trying to improve performance. But the more I did that, the more they increased. But I finished my military career still fully able to function. My time got more and more exciting, and I was going away more. I was on operations more and more, and I spent the last 3 years on operations across the world, doing at times 20-hour days for weeks and sometimes months on end. So I was absolutely still functioning at times. And then I would just notice it was a high performance environment. I was around other people that were performing lots as well. And my colleagues would joke about my sleep. They would, they would absolutely, make jokes about my sleep. And I just thought I was a little bit different. But I would still put all of that stuff in the very mild category, and in my time off, when also my stress was a lot lower, I was doing the same kind of things in my spare time. I was skiing, skydiving, paragliding, ski touring. Skiing's one of my favorite things to do. And I was skiing weeks on end. So I was still very capable. But I just think it's worth noting that that's when I first noticed these things, that I was different to other people. And suddenly I couldn't train day after day sometimes. Suddenly I couldn't train twice a day. And sometimes I would know I had these symptoms because some days I would be able to wake up and fire through a to-do list. And other days I'd be able to wake up and I would just barely get anything done all morning. And I'd be like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I perform like the people to my left and right? And I did a really good job of disguising that, I think. But that's when, in answer to your question, that's when symptoms started.
Yeah, probably 99.9% of the population wouldn't have been able to keep up with you even when you were having symptoms, at least that fraction. Well, what happened after you left the military? I assume the symptoms persisted.
They did. That's when they got bad. That's when my health really dropped off a cliff, to be honest with you. It was an interesting period for a number of reasons, especially that huge transition. I think my identity was absolutely linked to being in the military. So I think that was something that was interesting that was going on there. The second thing is, at the same time I left the military, or in the months that followed, I ended a 5-year relationship. And the third thing that was going on is that I was trying to make my way in civilian life. I felt really good in the military, and I left on a high. I had managed to sustain decent performance, and I felt really good about that. And now I had the pressure to perform in civilian life. I would say perceived pressure. I perceived a huge amount of pressure to do that. And as all of those things ramped up, my symptoms got really, really bad. And to the point where I guess the first thing I was really unable to train. But I had no idea what was going on. I remember a little snapshot. I remember, still thinking training was hugely important, still wanting to train lots. But I would get all my kit ready to go to the gym in the morning. And I would tell myself, right, all I've got to do is roll out of bed, put my shorts on and a t-shirt on and grab this bag and go to the gym. And I would wake up in the morning and I would just barely be able to get to the front room. I wouldn't be able to get to the front door. And I would be like, I couldn't tell myself why. I couldn't work out why. It was just confusing. There was no tangible, solid thing stopping me leaving the door, but I couldn't do it. And then after about 2 hours and a coffee or two later, I would eventually pluck up the courage and make it out the door feeling pretty awful. I would go to the gym and I would lock in the changing rooms, in a changing room, and I would nap for 15 to 20 minutes. And I look back on that and realize that's wild. That's not normal.
Not what people do when they go to the gym.
Yeah, not what you're meant to be in the gym for. And I would do 15 minutes of a, hour-long workout and just not be able to carry on. And I would then drag myself to my workplace, and then I'd lock myself in the toilet and sleep on a cold tiled floor, put a towel underneath my head and sleep on the floor for 20 minutes just to make it through the next few hours. And then I'll do the same again several times throughout the day to make it through. And then I'd have patches like this, and then I would have a good day again. And I'd be able to get through a to-do list, wake up at a normal time and achieve things. So it was the disparity between the two, and obviously the really clear disparity between being on operations and being able to do 20-hour days or being able to train, 6 days a week. And now I could barely function. And of course, very soon I had to give up all training. And maybe that helped for a few weeks. I think I did feel a kind of relief for a while, but it didn't last.
It must have crossed your mind to consult a physician at some point.
I did at some point. I didn't at that point, but a few months later when things were just getting worse and worse, I did start going to my doctor. And over a course of a few months, I think he got pretty bored of seeing me. Yeah, we started with normal blood tests and did extra panels. Some things occasionally would be a little bit, high normal. The liver values were a little bit out. So I was sent for lots of liver screens and ultrasounds. Yeah, I had lots of cortisol-based tests, but none of them kind of gave anything remotely conclusive. And normally the follow-ups would just come back as negative or normal or nothing to really pursue from a medical perspective.
Were you given a diagnosis of chronic fatigue somewhere along the way?
At some point, I think, after 10 to 15 rounds of this and all this testing, he said, look, the only thing I can do here is transfer you to a chronic fatigue syndrome clinic. I think it did that at that point, long COVID as well. And he said, that's all I can do for you. And that's what I think is going on here. And I talk about this metaphor because it's, there's a brief sense of validation. I felt like I now have this thing I can tell people, I've got this thing. It comes with fatigue, it comes with tiredness, it comes with brain fog, and that explains what's going on. And I felt validation, I felt relief. And then this other thing came with it when I started to consider my prognosis. I thought by this point, I'd given up training, I'd given up work, I wasn't doing anything. I was not doing anything at all. And I thought my life, it was a life sentence. My life as I knew it was over. And I had started also the Google rabbit warren. And the Google had told me that, only 5% of people recover. All the forums had reinforced it. I was spending a lot of time on Reddit, trying to get advice, trying to do everything. And so my prognosis at that point that I believed was that my life as I knew was over. I was never going to be able to ski again. I wasn't, even forget all those things. That's what I was genuinely sad about. And then I was also thought, hang on, can I drive across the country to see my family? I couldn't really drive. I just thought everything, my life as I knew it was over.
Yeah, I cannot even imagine going from the level of energy that you once possessed down to this, what that must have been like. Did the chronic fatigue clinic offer anything helpful?
Well, actually, it was at that stage, I think normally there's a few weeks follow-up between each appointment. And that was the exact point that I found the mind-body approach. And so, I'll go on to cover it, but my initial improvement was so quick that I had a transformative dive into this world. And it was at that very point, it was when I was at my lowest low and my lowest ebb, that's when I found it. Actually, it's not 100% true. I actually had read a book, which I can only kind of look back on in hindsight. I'd read half a book that was mind-body focused, based on the same approach that we understand now, based on neuroplastic symptoms, and it didn't go in. And I was in sheer panic mode. It was several months before, and it didn't stick. But at that very point, I found.
I'm just curious, did the chronic fatigue clinic offer these neuroplastic resources to you, or did you find them independently?
I didn't even make it to the clinic. I had just finished with my GP, that's obviously a general practitioner, which would be a medicine
Yes.
a specialist in America. And he said, that's all I can do for you, or transfer you. And it would be within the next 2-3 weeks that I found the mind-body approach. So I didn't even make it to a clinic. I have a rough understanding of them, but no. And my conversation with my doctor, I had actually held off. I didn't want to, but the point I was having that conversation, him telling me he wanted to transfer me to clinic, I had already been researching and thought that I had it, but I didn't want to tell it. I didn't want to say that to the doctor. I was scared, and I wanted him to come to the conclusion on his own. And when he said it, that's when it sunk in. Luckily, I never made it to the chronic fatigue syndrome clinic.
All right, fair enough. What were the key ideas that helped you the most?
You first hear about this approach, don't you? And I guess the first thing it's going to start telling you is that your brain can influence your body. And I think I just started at real basics. I was like, okay, well, is that true? Could that be true? And you're testing everything, aren't you? You want to know whether this can really help you. And you run it through a very quick set of common sense checks in your head. And I think at first when I say at first, I mean the first few days, I was absolutely skeptical. I was like, okay, my brain can affect my body. Got it. Like, I get goosebumps when I watch a film. I salivate when I see a burger. Got it. But it's a big, big jump from salivating with a burger to like what I've got. Like, I can't.
Yeah. Hey, I'm right there with you. When I first found out about this, I was just as skeptical. This can't be right. Your brain can't do this level of impact on your body, can it? Really?
It's unreal. And but then of course you then start to learn why it can. And I started to learn, okay, these systems in our body are designed for our survival, and their ability to affect the body is huge and incredibly powerful, because they need to save your life when they're working properly. That's what they're designed to do. That explanation helped me as a sort of former warrior. That felt good to me, and I sort of started testing it. I remember taking all of my symptoms, and one by one, I was still very much in the Google phase, and I was researching everything. And I would type in, okay, can a dysregulated nervous system contribute to fatigue? Like, can it influence all of these things? And going on all these forums where I was on, people are like, oh, but what about damaged mitochondria? What about and they go through every single symptom. It's all about mast cell activation, all these things. You slowly realize by typing it in, you're like, okay, the nervous system, our stress systems can influence every single symptom in the body. And every single time it'd come back, yeah, of course they can influence your energy. Again, if you're in fight or flight mode, it's designed to give you that energy to run away or to fight. And I'd experienced it myself. I'm lucky to say I've never experienced it to a huge degree where I never thought my life was in danger, but I'd certainly felt that feeling of getting ramped up before operations, hugely ramped up, even though nothing had happened. I'd still be in a safe place. And those kind of analogies, to be able to look back in my life and put it in those situations and frame in those situations, was also hugely useful. But sorry, I don't think I've answered your question.
No, you have. I'm looking for the ideas that really helped you emerge from this terrible condition. And that's absolutely the start. The idea that the brain can do this to the body is definitely idea number one.
The first thing that really changed things, all of that obviously changed things and gave me the foundation. But the first thing that really changed it was about fear. I read that, when you respond to your symptoms with fear, further expression of further into fight or flight, and our nervous system is staying dysregulated. And I thought, I'm not responding to my symptoms with fear. I think I know what fear is, and I don't recognize this.
The idea that your life as you knew it would be over might be something that would be frightening to most people.
If that isn't fear, then what is fear?
Exactly.
I was 100% reacting with fear. I just didn't recognize it for the first 24 hours. And then about a day later, I was like, I kind of became conscious of my internal narrative. And when symptoms came on, my internal narrative said, how bad is this one going to be? That last crash was terrible. I was out for days. My current baseline is going down, 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 down. This is the kind of terminology and how I'd speak to myself. And my internal narrative would just say, this is going to be horrendous. This is going to be awful. This could be your worst one yet. And your overall prognosis is terrible. And that's what my internal narrative sounded like. And that is a fear-based narrative. And when I realized that, when I became conscious of my internal narrative and realized that was how bad that was, and just that it was unhelpful, that I could be being really unhelpful to myself, that knowledge alone allowed me to something said in me, okay, well, if I don't respond with fear, then the symptoms won't be as bad and I don't need to have them as badly. And that knowledge was so powerful for me. It really kind of overnight eliminated most of the fear. There was still, so it did not get rid of entirely, but it really changed it. And I almost straight away noticed a shift in my symptoms. And that shift was the evidence I needed to then carry on this approach. And that throughout the whole process has been the number one biggest thing that's changed things.
Was there a message of hope that you saw in the neuroplastic material that perhaps you could recover from this eventually?
It was, a bit beyond words. It was two things. It was seeing my symptoms start to improve, and it was a story that made sense, that your nervous system is dysregulated, that you are stuck in this heightened stress response, and that can cause or at least exacerbate your symptoms. That for me was incredibly hopeful. And it told me, okay, well, if that isn't the case, then my symptoms I don't need to have, if my body doesn't need to create them, then brilliant, they won't be there. And I think I am an optimistic at heart the vast majority of the time. And so that was huge, gave me huge hope. And then when I saw improvement, that was the motivation and the hope I needed to stick with it. And my improvement was so fast. Within a few weeks, I was trying to go out running again. And I remember it as well, talking about fear. When I first went out running, it was probably about 3 weeks after hearing about this approach, and really
3 weeks.
3 weeks.
Wow.
It was really quick. And I no longer, my kind of yo-yoing had stopped. My baseline had fully steadied and I felt calm. All my symptoms hadn't gone, but I felt far calmer, and they no longer had, none of them, I never had that severity of symptoms again. And 3 weeks later, I said, well, can I go for a super gentle run? And I still had my fitness. I'd still been, a year before I'd been running, probably more recently that occasionally, but then had to stop. And I remember going out running, and I was still of the old mindset where I'd been very rigid, trying to pace and really rigidly pace. So I had my watch on with my heart rate monitor. And I said, well, I won't go over whatever it is, 110 beats per minute. And I'm jogging along and I'm looking at my watch constantly and I'm thinking, like, hang on, I'm about to go over here. And I then thought, hang on, is this helpful? I'm not going to go any faster. I'm out for a gentle run. If I apply this to this watch situation, I was still very early on in my learning. I'm not sure this fear-based thinking is helpful. And I took the watch off and I didn't go any faster, but I was already starting to click that actually rigid ideas of what I had, and this idea in my head that if I go 1 beat per minute over X, then bad things are going to happen. That was another fear-based response I very quickly learned wasn't helping me.
Yeah, taking the watch off was brilliant because that signifies a huge mental shift in being so focused on the smallest details of your life and your training to going to a much more carefree, but I would say much more self-focused approach, looking to benefit you rather than to achieve an arbitrary goal. Given what you've described about yourself earlier, that's a massive shift because you, up to that point, had been a massively goal-oriented person.
What you've just said there typifies the 10 years before and the start of my military career. I was always trying to achieve something. I always had a goal in mind. Part of my identity and worth was linked to it. And then I would hyper-focus and be hyper-vigilant on the little things that get me there. And I believed, I had this theory that you just add up all these 1%ers. So as my health started to deteriorate, and my sleep's suffering. So I need to research this. I need to optimize it to the nth degree. I want to be like a performance athlete. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure my sleep hygiene is perfect. All these supplements because I want my body to be at peak performance. And the more I was kind of hyper vigilant about those things, the more my health suffered. And then the MECFS part of it was the extreme end of that. So that was when I was, again, as my health got worse, I would just keep doubling down. Right, okay, what can I do? I need to optimize everything. I need to make sure I've got this perfect daily routine. I think back now and laugh at the amount of pressure I was putting myself under. I look back at my old notebooks and see these tick box things of, here's what I need to achieve before 10 a.m. I need to have seen the sunlight, done all these things to make sure that everything about my health is optimized. And I now laugh a little bit about it. And funny enough, I don't think my cat's about to join me. I don't think my health has suffered as a result. In fact, by striving for balance and being kinder to myself.
Yeah, it's being so detail-oriented and goal-oriented and doubling down. No person can double down indefinitely. And eventually, if there's nothing in your mind cognitively that tells you you have reached a limit, then your body will tell you instead. And it will force you to stop doubling down until you learn a different approach. Once you learn a different approach, 3 weeks to be able to go back out running again, that's really a dramatic turnaround after 5 years of chronic fatigue, would you say, if you added it all up?
I can't even put a definitive point estimate. I think I had very early symptoms before then, throughout my 20s, and they just steadily got worse. But I say 5 years because that's where I can notably kind of point back and say, I remember that period where, I trained and I just really felt like I wasn't keeping up with people. And I remember specific times where I'd try and train because I'd have something to be training for in the military, like a test, for example, and I'd want to perform well, and I would be kind of beaten up for days. So that's the first time I noticed it. And then it was that last year that was really bad. and where
Okay.
where I ended up,
All right.
really housebound. Yeah.
Well, let's go back even further and talk about experiences that you might have had as a child or as an adolescent that could possibly have contributed to your being a person who is goal-oriented, detail-oriented, achievement, doubling down constantly. Any experiences that you had as a young person that might have developed those characteristics in you?
I mean, it's clear to me now, but I don't think it was clear to me again when I first learned about it. And I remember again reading about this and reading about adverse childhood experiences. And that at that point, I was like, no, I had a tough childhood, but I'm really grateful for it, and and it made me who I am today. And I wouldn't change anything. And I used to, I think, have quite an unhelpful narrative. I think now looking back, I can see something very different. Sorry. And I think my childhood was indeed difficult. And when I was very young, I was moved from England to Wales, and I was moved to a Welsh-only speaking primary school aged 7. And that changed, and it doesn't sound too much. We're still moving within the United Kingdom. But when my parents separated this time as well, and being moved overnight to this, having I guess as a child, it probably felt like the rug being pulled from underneath you, and everything you're life changing. And I don't think I enjoyed my time in Wales at all. And I think it's at that point where that's probably the most significant thing. I wasn't happy there. And I think that led to me I look back now on my childhood through this lens, and I can see I was dysregulated pretty much most of or certainly my teens, probably the age of 7 or 8 onwards. And so at school, I was not interested at all in learning. And I am absolutely a type of, I don't think I'm your typical academic learner as well. I'm now kind to myself, and I know I'm intelligent and capable. But I don't think the type of intelligence I had was necessarily the type to sit there and learn huge amounts of academic things. I think I'm a very hands-on, practical, creative person. And so school was challenging, but I think I knew I had the capability, and I was never interested. I was always interested in causing trouble. I was the one that was doing anything silly, normally with science experiments or whatever else, and then getting thrown out of the class every time. And I still achieved okay grades, good enough to go to university, but it wasn't that was with very little trying and very little effort.
Well, I should add that for some people watching this, that, to go to a school where they only spoke Welsh, I mean, for someone raised prior to that time in England, it would have been the equivalent of going to Bulgaria. I mean, it's a completely different language, and would have left you, isolated and subject for bullying, certainly.
Yeah. And the honest truth is, I just was not happy. I was not happy there at all. And I was a young child in that situation. I think I can look at the times before and afterwards and say that I think I'm lucky to have a very naturally high happiness set point. But I was deeply, deeply unhappy.
And I would have say on top of that, a child of that age whose parents separate is going to be questioning themselves about how much they contributed to that separation, and usually exaggerating by a lot the amount that they contributed.
I think so. And I'm one of 4, so I have 3 siblings, and we then constantly moved between England and Wales over the next few years, and that was also difficult, and probably left me doing the same thing, questioning why or what was going on. And all of that, I think, so I didn't do particularly well at school, and so it was, and same then at university. But university was a big change. Then when I moved back to England and went to university, I started having a really good time. And at some point, I decided I wanted to join the military, and I was in a military university club, a military club at university where I'd started, and you can kind of get on the progression path where you can then you use an easy way to go and join the military. I say easy, sorry. They helped me prepare you. It didn't get me around any of the tests. And so when I hadn't performed overly well at school, and the same then at university, then when I did join the military, that was the first thing that I was like, okay, I'm actually good at this. I'm okay at this. And even now, that feels a bit awkward for me to say. I'm not typically a person that can talk about my achievements too easily. But for the first time, it was something I felt good about and I enjoyed. I found it hugely rewarding, and I did. And here's an interesting thing as well, which I've has been used for me in the last few years. It started to become part of my identity, and I think I wanted it to at the time.
Well, I should point out that a lot of kids who are in adverse or disrupted environments, one of the few ways they have to cope is to be very detail-oriented and achievement-oriented and goal-oriented. And when you find your way to the military, all of those qualities are highly sought after and rewarded, and it only builds from there. Let's put it that way.
I think you're right. I think you're spot on. And this was then this new thing. It wasn't school or university, and it was this new thing that I could be good at. And so it gave me those. Hey, there were some absolutely brilliant things, and I'm incredibly grateful. The military gave me a huge amount, and I loved it, and I would not change it. But I can notice these things in myself that were unhelpful. I was always driving. As soon as I was in to join the Royal Marines as an officer, thousands apply, and about 30 or 40 will get through each year. To pass training is pretty tough as an understatement. It's 15 and a half months of pure misery, to achieve that. And then as soon as I was in, a year or two later, I'd be like, what's next? What's the next course I can do? What's the next job I can get? I want to get away and do the hardest, most demanding job. And then I want to always be the fittest, the strongest. And when I'm not doing that, I want to be achieving things in my private life. So I want to go through my skiing qualifications and get my ski leadership qualifications. I got a private pilot's license. I really enjoyed flying small planes, and I was, everything, a skydiving license, all these things.
That is actually quite amazing, Chris, all of those things. Any one of them would be enough for most people.
I mean, I would not change them, but I just look at them now in a slightly different lens. I can see my former self for a bit more for what was going on and what we've talked about with my childhood in mind. And, I still do loads of these things. I still ski lots. I'm very excited over the next few weeks for snow to start falling here. And I still do them, but I do them from a slightly different place. And I do them with a recognition. Yeah. And my achievement, for example, sounds very different in my head. It sounds a lot like must or should. I still have goals. I don't think necessarily having goals is inherently bad at all. I think it matters where they come from.
Yeah, we should point out that you are not waiting for snow to fall and skiing opportunities in Kent or Surrey, that you're actually based in Vienna these days.
I am. I've just moved to Vienna, and I'm very excited for the...
That's very important, by the way, that so many of my patients do not have a interest in or even experience with taking time for their own joy. It turns out in my practice, my patients need to learn self-care skills. They need to be comfortable and guilt-free in taking time for their own enjoyment, activities that don't have a goal or purpose to them, except that you love to do them. And including that in your life is essential, because if you never have that, sooner or later, your body is going to protest. So the ability to take time, just go out for the pure enjoyment of skiing, that turns out to be an essential part of good mental and physical health.
It was huge for my recovery. Part of one of the messages I got very early on was do rewarding things. And if you don't have rewarding things, if I didn't have rewarding things in my life, then you are more likely to, I was more likely to be sat at home focusing on my symptoms and creating infinite space for worry, rumination, hyper focus on what was going on in my health, when I should have been living life in balance and doing meaningful things. And I even do that now at a micro level. I'll just say, I'll occasionally check in if I'm interested and say, over the next few days, have I got something that I'm actually truly looking forward to that actually brings me deep joy just for doing that activity? And I like to make sure there's some time in there to actually do things that bring me joy.
That's why that story you told about taking off the watch was so massive, because that was taking off the extreme goal orientation that you're used to have. That watch would never have come off if there hadn't been an enormous mental shift before that.
It was, I then slowly, when you come across this approach, you're going to get taught about all the different aspects. But then this magical moment happens when you realize you can actually apply them to all aspects of your life. And they're not all going to be listed because no one knows exactly what's going on in your life. Even working directly with a practitioner, they don't know everything about you, every little facet. And I suddenly started realizing how I can apply this across the board. Of course I do it like we spoke about my goals. I sort of test them and be like, hang on, do I really need to do this week? Is this coming from a place that's kind to myself? Is this a balanced goal in the first place? And where is it coming from? Is this coming from an extreme need to achieve things? But then I started, one example is sleep. My sleep used to tell myself my sleep would be awful. And it would be one of the biggest things for me. Even though most nights I'd still sleep for at least 6-7 hours. If I got anything less than 8 hours, I would be complaining and moaning to everybody in the morning. I would be able to tell you to within 5-10 minutes how much sleep I got every single evening. I'd be like, I had 7 hours 50 sleep last night. I would be so fixated on it. And of course I would do everything. I'd 3-inch of my windows. I would take the right supplements, zinc and magnesium, and do all of these things and sleep awfully, sleep absolutely terribly. And I thought, hang on, what if I've now learned that actually being intensely focused on really pushing really hard to achieve these things sometimes can backfire. What if I apply that to my sleep? And suddenly my sleep, I just challenged myself instead to not really pay that much attention to it, to not check the watch if I got up at night, not to worry, and then notice and record every single time I woke up and maybe I didn't get the perfect night's sleep, but I was still able to perform. So I stopped noticing the times that reinforced the belief that I was doomed if I didn't get 8 hours and that I wasn't able to perform. And instead I would write down every single time, like, okay, well, I didn't have a great night's sleep, but here I am, I've just done 3 hours, very good creative work and hard work. So it is possible. And those shifts, and there's a few others I'm not saying they haven't listed, but that shift suddenly meant sleep has never been an issue for me since. It never has. And even occasionally when I don't get a great night's sleep, it just doesn't seem to affect me anywhere near as much anymore.
Yeah, it's sleep is supposed to be, in a way, the ultimate self-indulgence, and it's something that we all need. And if we end up getting focused on it as yet one more goal of something we have to achieve, it obviously defeats the purpose. Well, you've learned a massive amount, and I know that you decided to give back to the chronic fatigue world by creating an app for people. Why don't you tell us how that came about and some of the ideas that you put into it?
Yeah, of course. I could not. I don't know how anyone can go through that experience of, as I said, almost feeling like you've lost your life and then getting your life back, which is one of the most wild and crazy things to go through as well. Being given your life back and then just walk away and forget it. It's I don't think I would have been able to. But as soon as I started recovering, I should say as well, I was helped by an app. I was helped by an app for chronic pain called Curable that I think many people have heard of, and it was absolutely brilliant. The only thing that made it slightly more difficult is that I had to translate everything to my symptoms. And for fatigue-related conditions, ME/CFS, long COVID, they do come up with unique challenges of crashes and PEM, as it's formerly known, post-exertional malaise. And those challenges are unique, and I think they are really tough. And I was almost struggling a little bit to put it all in that context, and I had to do some of the work myself. And so as soon as I recovered, that had been so groundbreaking for me. It had been the first thing I'd found that had made a huge difference. And I then walked into this world, opened the doors of this world, and realized that I was not alone in my experience. There are hundreds of people, and I'd been hanging around in the wrong places, so to speak, and I hadn't found these hundreds of people who have recovered from these conditions that we're told are incurable. And then you study them, which is what I did. I started looking, and they're now curious, and I like, kind of me too. Like, I've had this same experience. And you realize 90% of them have recovered in the same way. There are the same things you'll hear time and time again in these people that recovered. And it reinforced it. I was like, okay, well, I've been given this explanation. I've now researched it, and my researchers has come back and said, yep, this is valid. It explains everything you've gone through. And here's hundreds of other people who have the same experience. And I don't see the same amount of people who have recovered by taking zinc or whatever other things I had tried. And I had tried everything. I had my supplement drawer to looking for a pill or a supplement to fix it.
The supplement industry in the United States is approximately $70 billion.
I think most of that was me, Dave. I think 8 yeah. Anyway, so I couldn't walk away from it, and so I remember sitting down with a piece of paper and just saying, okay, well, what could my part to play in this be? And I loved the idea of an app because it can reach everyone, and we can make it accessible in terms of price, and everyone can use it. So I then realized as well that there are hundreds of related methods, basically all looking at the same thing, but looking at our stress systems. And we unhelpfully maybe use a lot of different terminology to say the same thing, and we're all broadly on the same page, and we use lots of different terminology. But I said, okay, can we take all of these approaches in the mind-body world, take the most commonly accepted, safe and effective things that people and practitioners are using to help their clients and their patients, and just put them in an app? And that's what FreeMe is. It's the stuff that worked, made super easy and super simple and broken down for you in a way that you can just pop on and do 15-minute sessions. So that's where it started, and it launched last year. And
where can people find it?
They can find it on the App Store, on the Play Store. They can search FreeMe, all one word, FreeMe, and that will bring it up straight away as well. And I think I don't know that we've showed you these, but over the last few months, we've really been working on our AI tools a lot, because I really feel like I have mixed feelings on AI overall, and then very optimistic feelings that I know that it can help people. And I've now seen it over the last few months, that it can help people, these approaches. Because imagine doing a session on this phone app, and you've just learned about some of the things we've spoken about today. And if you're anything like me, you've probably got 10 to 15 questions, and then straight away be able to say, chat about this session and ask those questions and get a response which is a mind-body recovery-focused response, not a doom and gloom response, a response which is based on these approaches, a chatbot that's trained on these approaches. We've now seen people's interactions with it, and I've had one negative piece of feedback in the past 5 months, which is from someone who said they found it too addictive, that they were using it too much, which is, in fairness, very valid. It's incredible to test it and ask it questions, given going back in my own head, and for it to come up with really good answers. So we're really working on that side of it as well, so that people can get advice. And it does not replace in-person care. There's a limit to what it can do, and it can't always ask the right questions. But hey, it does a very good job of getting you more than a book. And I think that's probably where we see FreeMe. You have lots of books that they are absolutely brilliant when you're at state, and that's where the core knowledge is. And then we have FreeMe, which is more interactive. It's easier to engage with potentially when you're at your worst, and you can have that support. Like, you can ask these questions, and then absolutely in-person care.
Yeah, these resources are so greatly needed. The number of people that suffer from chronic fatigue and related neuroplastic conditions is in the tens of millions. Over 1 billion worldwide. The number of practitioners who have the skills to help somebody with this is vastly small in relation to the need. So the app resource is one that is obviously highly scalable and can meet the needs of far more people than our individual practitioners can. So I applaud you for creating this, and I'm sure it will help a lot of people. Do you have any questions for me or anything else that you would like to share before we close?
If you had any reflections on my journey that you haven't already mentioned, it would always be lovely to hear them. But I hope I will also see you at next year's conference at the ATNS in Texas. I'm looking forward to that one as well.
Yes, October 15 to 17 in 2026 in Dallas, Texas is our next annual conference, and really looking forward to that. Just in terms of reflections, a remarkable journey that you've been on, and to find your way to these ideas and be able to implement them in a way that led to your recovery in a matter of weeks after so many years of having the symptoms is a remarkable tribute to your determination. There's clearly links to the difficult childhood experience you had. Kids in those environments, they don't have that many options for coping with the adversity, and becoming detail-oriented, goal-oriented, focused on achievement is one of the ways that kids can respond. And clearly in your case, you took that to an extremely high level. I think if anybody was to look up the details of the 15 and a half months of initial training of a Royal Marine, they would be likely shocked what they found. But you made it through that and much more because of that internal drive. But when the internal drive has no limits to it, then the limit becomes the body itself and the mind itself. just saying, we've had enough, and we are going to force you to stop your focus on the next achievement until you figure this out. And I think that's what happened. And it's an excellent example of the power of the mind to take somebody who's got enormous internal mental and physical strength and just bring them to a standstill. It's until I learned this for myself, I never would have believed it was possible. But now, of course, I've seen it in thousands of people over the years. Absolutely a tribute to your ability to change focus that you pulled yourself out of this. And I'm delighted that you're now using what you learned to help others. So thank you so much for that.
That's a complete summary of exactly what I see happen. So yeah, thank you. I know you know, but I think you're absolutely spot on. It is absolutely mind-blowing, the body's capacity to do that to you, as you say, and then the body's ability to heal when the conditions are right, or just return to its natural state of being able to function. Yeah, thank you. And you are on the board of the first thing that I found, which helped me. And I think sometimes we need to acknowledge the courage it takes to do this work as well. And I'm incredibly grateful that there are people out there providing resources and signposting things. And it took for me maybe 2 times for that seed to really be planted. And then it was planted early. And then when I then really found it and knew that it was there and growing to carry on in algae, it was everything I needed. And I'm incredibly grateful for the work everyone else does in this field, especially you.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dave.